you want to start at the bottom of sales, it's really about telling stories. Train accountability, train accountability, train accountability, train accountability until it's like breathing. You want to be able to make the same amount of money, work less, more joy, more happiness.
Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back. Ryan Willard here, Principal Partner at Business of Architecture. Want freedom from your firm? Master this one surprising skill. So, have you ever felt trapped in the business you built? You started your firm for freedom, yet you're working nights, weekends, and still not making enough money. Every time you try to delegate something, this falls through the cracks and you end up fixing it yourself. Sound familiar? Well, on today's episode, you're going to discover the hidden mindset trap that keeps architects stuck in overworked and underpaid, the biggest delegation mistake that causes employees to leave and what to do instead, and the surprising skill that every architect must master. And guess what? It's not design. In today's episode, I sit down with Geoff Hoover, a master of diagnosis when it comes to architecture firm success. With a background of 30 plus years in engineering, marketing, and sales, Geoff has scaled teams, doubled revenues, and built multi-million dollar businesses. As a principal of Business of Architecture, he helps firm owners pinpoint hidden inefficiencies, fix broken systems, and build thriving practices. Today's episode is sponsored by World Teams. One of the top headaches of running an architectural practice is matching work with staffing. What if there was a way to flexibly scale your workforce according to needs? A while ago, we began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. World Teams helps small firms build qualified remote teams quickly and easily, saving you the hassle of sorting resumes and interviewing unfit candidates. They work in your time zone, prioritize near native English speakers, and offer flexible contracts so you can scale as needed. Plus, you work directly with your remote team, building trust and cutting costs without sacrificing quality. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. That's one word, businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. As a reminder, sponsorship is not an endorsement, and you must do your own due diligence before entering into any business relationships. Get the free remote teams guide by going to businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. As a reminder, if you haven't already watched the free firm owner masterclass on the smart practice method, what are you waiting for? Discover how to eliminate overwhelm and slay chaos in your practice so you can focus on the architecture again. As always, make sure you listen all the way to the end to catch important listener owner bonuses and information. Now, if you're ready to break free from the cycle of micromanagement, burnout, and feast or famine income, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Geoff, welcome to the Business of Architecture podcast. How are you, sir?
Oh, great. How are you?
I'm very well. Well, what a delight to have Geoff Hoover here, who is one of the principals here at Business of Architecture. You are a master in diagnosis, audit, and identifying the symptoms of what's really causing an architecture practice to not be as efficient and profitable as it could be. And you've been here working with myself and Enoch for over a year now. Is that right? How long have you been with
Coming
us?
up on a year, yeah.
Yeah, just
But
nearly a
actually,
year.
very close. Yes.
Yeah, so an amazing addition to the team, and your breadth of insight, your experience, your ability to be able to kind of really get to the roots of a practice's, the kind of the real kind of core pains of what's causing these inefficiencies has been such an amazing addition to what we do here at Business of Architecture, and sets it up for the kind of entry into the smart practice program, where we kind of start to fix these ailments. But none of that can happen without a proper diagnosis, which is what your expertise really is. So why don't we start just by telling us a little bit about your background, because you've got a really interesting background
Yeah.
in kind of communication, in sales, in engineering, and in construction. So you really know the industry from lots of different perspectives. So why don't we kind of start there? What tell us a little bit about your engineering background, and then
Okay.
how you got to be with this motley crew.
A 2-minute summation of 56 years.
Yeah, basically.
Um, Well, I do have a civil engineering background. I have a bachelor's of science out of Long Beach State. Um, and I worked in engineering for about 5 years, and then I went into marketing, which I stayed in marketing for approximately 25 years, and 14 years of that I owned my own marketing company.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, I built I helped build a sales, team for a 5 station radio station. Was able to double them in sales in a couple of years, and then my last position was with a remodel business where I did the same thing, sold, and I also built their sales team to $6 million from 3 million. So that's what I seem to be good at. Like after all these years, number one is understanding, things about companies to help them become better, okay, in sales, and then also how to develop teams, behind that so that they know, how to handle those type of
Mhm.
clientele too.
And why did you leave engineering?
It wasn't a choice, you know?
Right.
I can remember conversations with my mother saying, "You went to school for 5.5 years." By the way, 5.5 years is no record, there. So I'm just saying, okay, we had a little bit of fun in college. I did extra uh activities, if you know what I'm saying. But anyways, after 5.5 years, you're gonna jump to something else. Well, I couldn't control that. I was working as an engineer. They had massive layoffs. I didn't think I was gonna be the great Geoff Hoover laid off. What? I
Mhm.
mean, so it about crushed me at that time. So I had to make some shifts. I mean, life doesn't always go the way that you thought it was gonna go. And sometimes those shifts are a greater shift. As I look back on me going from a very introverted engineer
Mhm.
into now a very extroverted position of sales. I mean, who would have thought I would have even lasted in that, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's some innate skills that I have that probably some engineers, are wanting, but you got to go through a little bit of struggle there to get to that point,
Mhm.
so and I had to take that on the chin and keep on
Well,
moving.
it's interesting just in terms of career development, like, and certainly, a lot of professions are quite introverted, they're detail orientated, and any kind of university education really is preparing you for that kind of, it's rare that we get taught communication and leadership
Yeah,
and selling and marketing in any kind of real capacity at university. And these
yeah,
professions are very kind of introverted. Um,
yeah. It's a great point you bring up because you think about it. Everyone graduates, even you could even graduate with a business degree, but you don't know anything about communications and you know 0 about actually selling. And you hear all that, "Well, I don't wanna be, in sales." Who wants to be known as a salesman? It's almost a negative connotation, especially as an engineer, an architect, but let's face it, we're all in sales. If you're married, you're in sales.
Mhm.
You know, if you're in a relationship, you're in sales. Um so owning a business is, quite frankly, you're not gonna have much of a business if you don't know how to get clients, so these things are become very important, but are not taught in college.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit about like how you define sales, because selling, the word sales, and even and marketing as well, often in the architectural world is they're dirty, stinky words. Nobody ever wants to
Yes.
associate themselves with being a salesperson. Nobody wants to talk to a salesperson. But as you say, actually, the art of selling it's not really something you can even get away from if you're going to live like a human being with friends or
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah. I think if you wanna start at the bottom of sales, it's really about telling stories.
Mhm.
Like, if you get a set of new tires and they were, good price and you know that they're gonna last and you're just super sweet the way your car drives, you're probably gonna tell a few people about it, and those few people are gonna go buy this product. That's selling. But does that make you a salesman? No, it just makes you a person who lives life and understands the importance of telling stories. Now, if you work for that company, then all of that changes because now you feel like, "Oh my god, I gotta act a certain way." I guess the secret is not to act and just be yourself.
Mhm.
Right? One thing I've learned is that I'm very proud of what I accomplished in school,
Mhm.
so I'm proud of the fact that I got an engineering degree. It's become an asset, and selling isn't selling to me. It's about telling stories and understanding the person that's right in
Mhm.
front of me. That makes
Why do you
sense.
why do you think sales gets a bad rap? And certainly
Because
in
yeah,
in our professions, in architecture and engineering, like why are people suspicious of it? Why do people not want to be
yeah,
associated with it?
I think it's an American thing, maybe it is a global thing, but you know, in America, everybody's being sold.
Mhm.
I mean, you can't walk out your front door. Billboards are selling you. People are knocking at your door. If you own a business, they're coming into your business. So there's always this connotations of what do you want?
Mhm.
Like as soon as you see someone coming, you can see them a mile away. What do you want? You walk on the car lot. Oh my goodness, really? I got to put up with this Yahoo over here. So automatically, before you even do anything or say anything, you've got to bypass that what's written already in the American mind.
Mhm.
That's why a lot of other countries are not so used to it, you know, um, like the Chinese, they don't even think about selling, they're just
Mhm.
out rocking and rolling. Nobody even thinks about it. They listen to everything,
Mhm.
so and maybe that'll change for them. It probably will. But I'm just saying in America, we're so used to it. We think we're such pros at dissecting and oh
Mhm.
yeah, this where this person is. It's the prejudgment thing.
Yeah.
So a person who has to be involved in that has to know that and they have to find a way to be a real person, not someone with tricky dialogue,
Mhm.
that's gonna get them into
Well,
buying
that
you.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the thing, right? Is that as a society, we're so used to bad selling, bad examples, and people kind of pulling the wool over our eyes, or those annoying phone calls that you get from an insurance salesperson trying to see if you've been in a car accident or an injury or something like that, or the classic example of the used car salesperson who's trying to dupe you. There's so many sort of everyday experiences of that societally we kind of put our defenses up at any time
Yeah.
that we think that we're selling, and we don't want to be associated with it. But
Yeah.
it is like the for a business owner, it is the thing that you are doing everywhere. You're doing it with your clients to get them to sign up with you for a contract. You're doing it with as an architect. You've got to sell the design ideas all the way through the life cycle of the project. You've got to sell your team members into taking on new ideas, taking on responsibility. You've got to sell ideas to your close allies, other consultants, etc. It's a very deep form of human communication.
Yeah. All of these skills they taught you in college, right?
Mhm. We wish, we wish, we wish.
So it's like it's trial by fire is what it is.
Hmm.
They hear this all the time. Well, yeah, I struck out about 50 times and then I figured it out.
Hmm.
And I said, I suppose there's not a kinder way of doing that or not a faster way of doing that, right? And
Hmm.
usually the answer is no, Jeff. There's probably a faster way. I just don't know what it is,
Hmm.
right? So the real and I call those people warriors. Why? Because they still got up, right? They got blood all over them. They got back up and said, "Well, let's go for it again. That was fun." That's a warrior to me. And they're
Yeah,
still standing going, "Okay, I think I need some help. I'm done being bloodied and bludgeoned."
yeah.
So that's the amazing thing about where we come in
Hmm.
is, yeah, we know all those stories. We probably experienced them ourselves, so, you got a whole bunch of warriors sitting at this table across from you, and they don't even know it.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Um, I want to talk a little bit about a bit more of your background actually, because another interesting thing about you is you've been an elite athlete as a water polo player, and also you were a lifeguard. And
Yeah.
I think there's relevance here as well in terms of what you're doing now in terms of helping architects and being a lifeguard.
Yeah.
And and I wonder if there are any sort of things that you've learned about being a lifeguard that you're kind of seeing, as you're interacting with architectural practices.
Yeah. Well, I tried out for lifeguards 4 years in a row, and my last year was my last year. I was not gonna try out again.
Mhm,
I always made the qual I was always fast enough, but I was just this little puny thing. I think my wrists were about this big, and
mhm.
they were worried that I couldn't carry somebody up the beach. I'm like, "Give it I can carry someone. I could do it." And the second reason why I wouldn't get in there is because I didn't know how to dress in the interview. And what I didn't understand about being a lifeguard, which is, you know, funny that it would be this way, is that you actually had to dress sharp. I didn't know how to dress sharp. So I get
Right.
killed on my interview. My first impression, I'm walking in with wallabies and corduroys, and I know I'm dating myself, but that wasn't in back then, okay? And, I wasn't in like a suit and a tie, and a red tie and a blue suit. I didn't understand, so I had to get bludgeoned a little.
Mhm,
Had I done that, I probably would have made lifeguards, okay?
mhm,
But less than 1% make it anyways.
mhm,
Just to get in, they're taking probably the top 10% just to get into training, and then they train you in the
mhm,
dead of winter with the highest surf at 52 degrees so
mhm,
that you're freezing like a Navy SEAL in your little Speedos and your dinky little Speedos running around the beach trying to win.
mhm,
And then they take the maybe half of that out of training. The other half, well, sorry, you just
mhm.
went through hell week, 7 days of torture, but you didn't make it. I went through one round of that. I didn't make that qualification. Then I tried out for the last year and made it.
Wow.
So that's my lesson in lifeguards. Of course, there's lots of great stories I could tell you about saving lives, but the real life is I didn't give up. I didn't give
Mhm,
up on that little dream I had. Thank God I didn't. Can you imagine if I would have quit at the third time?
mhm.
I wouldn't even have a story otherwise.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I didn't know that, the yeah, the kind of and obviously, it makes a lot of sense that the rigor of actually being accepted to become a lifeguard is no joke,
It's
'cause
no joke. Yeah.
literally people's lives are in your hands, so
In your
th there's a
hands. Yeah. I don't think you necessarily need to be the fastest, but you need to be quick enough.
Mhm,
And I mean, there was we used to do these pier jumps off of a couple story high into about 3 feet of water. Well, I was really good at that. I just
mhm,
never been afraid of heights. I'm really good at jumping and stuff. So they would use me to do depth checks. And I can remember jumping off into, the ocean in about 3 foot of water. And I landed and my back was on the sand. And I stood
mhm.
up. I stood up.
My back is hurting just hearing this story.
I stood up. And the master of the class said, "Okay, everybody a little deeper." I'm like, "That was my life."
Yeah.
Like I coulda died if I jumped wrong,
Mhm,
So it was very intense. It's not for everybody.
mhm,
And, but it's for the one that's, has a little bit of that adrenaline seeking type of attitude, like I can do this. I wanna feel
mhm.
this, so
And I'm guessing then as well, kind of mentally, there's a lot of skills that you need to either just develop when you're in a life or death situation, and obviously you're coming into somebody who's, if they're out at sea and they've got themselves into trouble, they're probably not going to be in the most calm state. They're
yeah,
probably going to be in, and that's quite a skill in itself to be able to deal with somebody who's panicking, flailing around, and you have to bring them back to shore, and also kind of be
yeah.
reassuring at the same time, or and also not get injured yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting and it's so relatable to what we do too,
Hmm.
Um, the fact of the matter is you train until it becomes like breathing.
Hmm.
So even when I always thought, because I don't like the sight of blood, for me, I'm fainting even if I see somebody else, like, but what I found is that I was trained so much that when I got to the emergency 911 situation, my brain went on autopilot. And then after I had treated, the victim, that's what we call them, we treated the victims, whatever it was, whatever injury, I would have to sit on the beach and then I was lightheaded and felt like I was gonna throw up. And I was paranoid, as a
Wow.
person who's supposed to save lives, like, I'm like, "Okay, Jeff, are you gonna even be able to do it?" Now, there's a secret to this, and this is
Hmm.
what we do at Smart Practice too. Train accountability, train accountability, train accountability until it's like breathing,
Uh-huh.
right? Which is why practices are so successful.
Uh-huh.
So they're learning an attribute of success that I learned as a lifeguard. don't think about it, go on autopilot. I didn't understand that at a young age. Now, years later when I'm assessing what I went through, I'm like, man, the world is like this. Like that's
Mhm.
success leaves clues, period.
Yeah.
Right? And it leaves clues in every profession, in everything you do. So was it an asset for me? Yeah.
Mhm.
I got to experience that kind of thing, doing that.
Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about what you do here at Business of Architecture. We have a lot of firms that are wanting to be part of the smart practice. We can't let everybody come do it on, as much as we'd love to. And there needs to be a kind of a process of finding the right kind of firm, and that firm being able to be honest enough to go through a diagnosis to really look at what's the underlying problem. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you know how you go about diagnosing symptoms with firms, and what sorts of things, what are the kind of surface level irritations that you see that actually have something much more substantial underneath under them.
Yeah, it's funny. Nobody wants to admit it, look, this isn't working out, right? I mean, who wants to tell somebody that they don't know, hey, look, I don't think this is working out and it could be me. It could be on me. So I think the first thing is I want to have some kind of a connection and understanding the person,
Mhm.
right away. Because if there's no connection, it's hard. It's hard to keep moving forward. Um, I think understanding and developing a trust and being kind, with someone who's potentially going to tell you some things that they've never even told anybody.
Mhm.
I've been told many times. I feel like I'm in therapy, you
Mhm.
know, and it's you kind of are because we're asking some questions here that, quite frankly, we want to find out what's going on and if we can even help you. I don't
Mhm.
think you start making decisions like in anything until you get to the hurt or what we call the pain.
Mhm.
And so it's the pain where you kind of go, I am done. Right. And that exact pain can stop you from owning a practice.
Mhm.
It can cause you to say, you know what? I guess I'm not good enough. When the reality is you are.
Mhm.
You just might not know exactly what to do. It's not a big thing. So,
Uh,
yeah.
And it's interesting as well, because there's so many different sorts of levels of success, right? And we work with firms who, by a lot of other people's standards, that they're really successful. They're bringing in decent money.
Yeah.
They've got a big team, and they'd be envious. A lot of other people would be envious of these businesses, but there's
Yes.
often, that's one category, and there's often stuff happening there that's not working. And then you've got, on the other end of the scale, kind of much more younger businesses that are in startup mode and are just looking to bring in work. So
Yeah.
perhaps you could start to illustrate what are some of the different types of pains that you see with firm owners.
Yeah. That's a good question. You know, Usually a younger firm is in just starting a practice that the thing that they become consumed with is a couple of different things. Either they're starting to be successful, they're getting some projects, but they're starting to wear too many hats, right? As they're taking on projects, they actually know what they need to do. They just
Mhm.
don't have time to do it. Right? Because now they're doing the admin, they're doing the accounting, they're doing the, proposal writing, they're doing the, go out and meet the client, then they're coming back, "Man, I gotta put this fire out." So before you know it, they're working the weekend after Thanksgiving and wondering, "What am I doing here? This is my dream. Like,
Mhm.
I'm super passionate about this, but this all I think about. Is this what life is?" Or
Mhm.
a younger practice is, like, not really understanding. They don't have any advice, anybody talking to them, consulting, saying, "Look, you should probably charge this much." "Well, I don't think I could get away with that." How do you really know what you can?
Mhm.
Have you priced out the market? Do you know exactly what the market is calling for? So they could be having all these jobs, like I've seen this before. They have all these jobs, but they're not making any money,
Yeah.
and they're just surviving, okay?
Mhm.
The second ones would be the ones that are successful. Money is just no object,
Mhm.
right? And they've succeeded. and they found a way to be profitable. They don't, seem to have an issue with that. But since they built this baby, they've created like a trench for themselves that they can't get out of, right? They're almost afraid to let go of some things in fear of this person is not gonna do what I told them to do, right?
Mhm.
And that's an honest fear because it's happened to them. They've given somebody some power in their company already. Maybe
Yeah.
they've been at it for some time, and that person just, screwed it all up.
Mhm.
And so now that's like PTSD in their mind. Oh, that's gonna happen again. Nope, I'm gonna cut it off here. I'm not doing this again. Never letting that control go again. You see what I mean? And you get
Yeah.
stuck in this mindset. Now, how are you gonna transition that? And in fact, not even transition. Do you ever go on a vacation?
Mhm.
Right? It becomes about how do I put my company on autopilot and trust that it's actually gonna perform?
Mhm.
You know, could I go to Bali for 1 full month knowing that I'm a phone call away? I could probably run my company from most architects, they don't even think that way. They
Mhm.
don't think it's possible.
Oh, that's such an interesting one, right? The kind of the fear of delegation, right? And delegation, yeah, it's on the surface of it, intellectually, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, of course, I'm going to delegate my tasks out to other people. In reality, there's this whole emotional world around the fear of letting go of stuff. And as you say, it's a valid fear because they've done it in the past. And yeah, and sometimes it's with a trusted person in their firm, and
Yeah.
they gave them responsibility on a business, and then they dropped the ball momentarily. And there was a lawsuit that arose, or the threat of a lawsuit, and that can be enough to really rattle somebody. Of like, okay, then I've got to make
Yeah.
sure that, and then we start seeing that fear from the owner then projected down to everyone else in the business. And what do you see then as the impact on the employees when the owner's doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of things. One is they're never allowed to have any type of creative sense that they already were born with,
Uh-huh,
right? And so what does that create? Well, now you're micromanaged
uh-huh,
and the employee's thinking, I have a brain.
uh-huh,
And just because I don't do it your way doesn't mean it's not better. It could be better actually.
uh-huh,
The owner doesn't even know that. It could be better, right? If you could wrap yourself around that. So what is that? What's the impact of that? Employees leave after a period of time.
uh-huh,
They get tired of it because if you got somebody who's a go-getter or somebody who knows that they have much more to bring to the table
mhm,
and you haven't allowed them to find that, now you have a somebody who's thinking about maybe starting a practice of their own. Okay, or, they just flat leave, they wanna work under different leadership that allows them to be freer, right? To be feel like they're partners. When your company is really running itself, you feel like a partner. I don't care if you're in admin, I don't care if you're doing accounting or, a position like myself, you're feeling like, "Look, I am a partner in this thing, I'm a valuable asset, I'm allowed to have free reign, free thought process," all of that. Now that takes a lot. Especially from an owner that has PTSD in
uh-huh.
these areas that's done like, when they're younger maybe or younger practice, I should say, they did that and they got slammed,
Yeah.
right? Because maybe they went about it all wrong.
Mhm,
Maybe there were skill set there about delegation, okay, that they don't understand about people. Maybe they don't understand things about leadership and motivating their staff,
uh-huh,
okay, and about letting go of things. It may not go right. Okay. I had a very successful uncle, when I was growing up. That's the reason why I got my engineering degree. He owned
mhm,
several practices and now nationwide, very successful. He used to tell me all the time. He said, "It's not most people just don't make a decision, Jeff." I said, "Well, weren't you scared you'd make the wrong one?" He said, "Yeah." I go, "Did you ever?" He goes, "Yeah." I say about 10% of the time I didn't make a decision correctly. I go, "Well, what happened?" Oh man, you don't even want to know the backdraft of that. Right? Right? So, it wasn't good, but
mhm,
90% of the time, it was awesome,
uh-huh,
okay? But being able to make a clear, concise decision quickly means that there is a risk of failure. There's always a risk of failure, but you're not going to be able to proceed and get to 90% unless you actually get in the realm of start making those decisions.
Mhm.
So that's what's so difficult about owning your own company or practice is that that's the risk.
Mhm.
But the only way to find out sometimes is by taking that risk.
Mhm. Do you find that like a lot of the clients that we have here that sometimes their initial issue is that like the ability to make a decision quickly can be quite impeded, and there's a lot of analysis and spinning wheels and
I think none of them think they are until they get into our practice and they
right.
start to see things. They think, man, I'm really good at making decisions. I make them right away.
Mhm.
But I think after they see the ways and how we help people make clear decisions very quickly, I think
Mhm.
they understand where they were and where they could be. There's a difference of what you think, right? So everybody has an impression of themselves, but they don't really have an impression of how the world sees them. And the
Mhm.
world sees you a certain way, and we're about 90% certain of what we see, except you don't
Mhm.
even know what that is that the world sees. And
Yeah.
so the only way you find out is by being coached in those areas. A coach could say something in one sentence to change your practice for 10 years.
Mhm.
One sentence, okay? And a corrected practice for 10 years. Is that amazing?
Mhm.
That's not something I said. I heard this from
Yeah.
someone who was already successful.
Mhm.
They said this one sentence and it changed my practice for 10 years.
In terms of symptoms, or like we were talking earlier about, it's like you go into the doctor with a head cold, and then actually there's other things that are underlying. What are some of the kind of head cold symptoms, and then what can be some of the underlying
Yeah, I
more
think,
more 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 deeper fundamental issues that you often see?
yeah, that's good. I think the real symptom right up front, especially when you're brand new, is you're a little overwhelmed.
Okay.
Okay, right off the bat. I
Uh-huh.
think as you get a more mature practice, you kind of accept the overwhelm. And like you said, I mean, we've talked about this before. You're kind of limping around with a limp, and
Yeah.
you think you're supposed to limp.
Yeah.
You've been doing it so long. Okay,
That's how we all walk like this, don't we?
that's right. And so, what happens is, okay, so the difference being is with the a younger practice is that they want to correct that right away. It's almost like this new generation of younger, practices. They're like, I don't want the limp, so right away they're kind of going into it with they're fairly open. Now, someone who's got the limp already, well, they don't know what's out there to begin with. So all of a sudden they plug into one of our podcasts and the truth sets you free. They kinda go,
Mhm.
"What? There's something else?" And they begin to get very intrigued, like, "I've never heard this before." And so something happens, when you hear the truth, and the I guess the old saying is it sets you free, when you
Mhm.
hear the truth. That's what actually happens.
Mhm.
I had a person who had a 25-year-old practice said, "I wish I would have met you guys 25 years ago." Well, we've been in business 10 years.
Mhm.
Well, thank God you got here now.
When was the best time to plant a tree? Well, 25 years ago. The next
25
best
years
time
ago.
the next
That's
best
right.
time is today.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about this idea of truth, and like why would a company go through a diagnosis in the first place? Like, what's the point of having such a diagnosis or an audit, or be faced with the truth? Because it sounds scary.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one, because everybody's different. I
Hmm.
guess it comes down to is in a more broad spectrum is how do you wanna live,
Hmm.
right? If you wanna start attacking that one, you're gonna get all kinds of answers. But
Hmm.
most people, the way they want to live is they don't want things owning them,
Hmm.
okay? The reason why they started a practice is not to be owned, but unfortunately, they created their own prison. Prison meaning not, "I don't have enough money." Prison meaning, like, "I'm stuck and I have to go back because I've been doing this for so long,"
Hmm.
or, "I don't have anywhere else to turn to." So I think really the symptoms have to be, "Look, I wanna live a certain way, and I'm not gonna give up on that way of living. Now I need to find a way to get what I want."
Hmm.
right? Now, if that means I want weekends off and I want a 2-week vacation where I don't have to think about my company, well, put it up on the board.
Hmm.
Put it in front of you. Like, I don't want to work on the weekends. Or maybe you want to work 3 days a week. What's wrong with that?
Hmm.
I have a college roommate who's a doctor now. He works 3 days a week. Golf's one of those days. Good for him, right? So you want to be able to work your way out of a practice, but still make more money,
Hmm.
right? That's called working smart, not hard. Anybody can dig a trench for 50 years, and that trench will be, oh, just so nice,
Hmm.
but you're still working your butt off for the trench. Okay. You want to be able to make the same amount of money, work less, more joy, more happiness.
Yeah.
So it really comes down to, how do I want to live? How do I want to get up in the morning? How do I want my time spent with my family? How do I want my brain to shut off, or what do I want it to be thinking about
Hmm.
24/7? Is it about your business, or are there other things that are way more valuable than your practice?
Hmm.
I don't suppose there is, right?
Absolutely.
So
Right. So there's it's the freedom. It's that's what the kind of ultimate intention is there. Is like this process of reflecting or looking into the mirror and kind of ensuring that you understand what the root problems are. That's the beginning point of being able to. That's the beginning point of freedom.
yes,
Really, that's what this whole exercise is about. And so many practices that we'll come across, they you know not willing to look into the mirror or not willing to do a diagnosis and kind of accept the limping around. That's just the way it is. That's the way that architecture can be.
yeah, and it's,
That's.
as I'm learning, it's tough in the architectural world. I mean, they're brought up that way. You know,
Hmm.
you're really an artist,
Hmm.
and an artist, has things that you know you can really elevate your artist skills being an architect, and there's rewards, there's all kinds of things and accolades, and it doesn't necessarily mean your practice is on autopilot.
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you get to live the life that you want, okay? But it can. I just think that the way that it's, talked about as an architect, it's like, man, I shouldn't talk about my success.
Hmm.
There's like there's something you know, in beginning to understand about architects is that, man, I'm just supposed to be good at what I do as a designer and not really talk about how I'm performing as a business. Do I make money? And if I do, don't talk about it,
Hmm.
right? It's a bizarre thing, but it's a real thing in the
Yeah.
architectural
Well,
world.
it often comes from this belief in architecture that if you just do good work, then everything else will fall into place. And doing the good work is the bare minimum of running a successful architecture practice. And the firms that are doing really well and who do great work, guarantee you they talk about their work, they market their work, they sell their work, they're good with their teams, they've got their finances sorted out, they're financially literate, they've got they track their profit, they're goal focused, and the good work is part of that. There's too many firms that do amazing design work that no one's ever heard of, that are kind of flailing from side to side, and they might produce a beautiful building occasionally, but the process of doing it is really painful, and it's got a high turnover of team members, and it's just it's there's other ways. There's other ways.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
Um, Brilliant. So I think for people listening to this, if they want to, uh, you know, speak with you and have a get off the nail call, as we were calling it earlier, perhaps you can tell us what does that mean? What
Oh,
does it
get
what
off the nail. Well,
yeah what
it
does a get off the nail call?
all right, I'll tell the story about it because that's the only way I can tell it, because I heard it. So, how you hear something and then you steal it and it becomes yours? This has
Yeah.
become mine now. So, there's a guy sitting on his porch and he's got his dog there, Blue, and the dog is just like, "Arr, arr, arr, arr," and the neighbor comes up and says, "Hey, what's going on with your dog, man?" I go, "Oh, well, he's sitting on a nail." And neighbor goes, well, why did you get off the nail? And the owner says, well, I guess it doesn't hurt that bad. So here you are. You may be sitting on a nail. Oh, I hate this about my practice. I hate that. You're sitting on this nail, but what are you willing to do about it to get off that nail, to make it work the way you want to live? Right. So that's what we call getting off the nail and working. And you know what? The hungriest person gets the most acorns, so to speak. So if you're hungry, you get what you want, right? If you're just going through the motions, most likely you may get a percentage of what you want. But what do you really want? Because it comes down to your desire and your passion to really go after something and be hungry for it, like real hungry, right? What's the impact if you don't?
Yeah.
You do the same thing over and over again,
Mediocrity.
expecting a different result,
Yeah.
right? Which is insanity, like everybody knows. You're just going to go insane. So we want to break that pattern of insanity, right? And get off that nail.
Brilliant. Love it. And that's the perfect place to conclude our conversation there, Geoff. I'll put all the details into the information of this podcast for people who want to jump onto a quick chat with Geoff, a truth call, a strategy session. They're very enlightening conversations, and that could change the future of your business. So thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks a lot.
We'll do more of these. Thank
All
you.
right. Sounds good.
And that's a wrap. Hey, Architect Nation, since you listened this far, I wanted to tell you about a free smart practice tool for you. Here's a financial truth bomb. Most architecture firms are collecting just 60 to 70% of what they could be earning on every project. You're doing the work, bearing on the stress, carrying the liability, but leaving $250,000 on the table annually without even knowing it. The Revenue Capacity Planner is your 30-minute financial reality check that shows exactly how much money your firm could and should be making right now. Get this tool 100% free by going to businessofarchitecture.com/capacity. Today's episode is sponsored by World Teams. One of the biggest challenges in running an architectural practice is balancing workload and staffing. World Teams helps small firms build qualified remote teams quickly and easily, saving you the hassle of sorting resumes and interviewing unfit candidates. They work in your time zone, prioritize near native English speakers, and offer flexible contracts so you can scale as needed. Plus, you work directly with your remote team, building trust and cutting costs without sacrificing quality. Download your free remote Teams guide at businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. Thank you to our recent listeners who left reviews for the podcast on iTunes. Your reviews help others find this podcast so the rising tide raises all boats. To be acknowledged on the show, open up the podcast app on your iPhone, search for Business of Architecture, and after clicking on the show, scroll all the way to the bottom to leave a review. Today's episode of the Business of Architecture show is sponsored by Smart Practice TM, the world's leading step-by-step solution for small architectural practice owners that want to structure their existing practice so the complexity of business doesn't get in the way of the architecture. Because you see, it likely isn't your architecture skills that hold you back. It's the business aspects of running a practice, managing projects and people, dealing with clients, contractors, and of course, with money. So if you're ready to quit being a glorified administrator and get back to architecture again, go to smartpracticemethod.com to discover the proven, simple, and easy to implement smart practice method that is revolutionizing firm management for owners and teams. Hey, Ryan Willard here, and I want to thank you for joining us today and remind you that the views expressed on this show by our guests do not represent those of the host, and we make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you conquer the world. Carpe diem.